The kitchen of Serena's signature catering smelled of smoked paprika, brown butter, and the kind of generational pride that you can't buy, only build. It was 6 a.m. on a Tuesday in Atlanta, Georgia, and the industrial stainless steel prep tables were already humming with the rhythmic chopping of 3 sous chefs. At 58, I knew this kitchen better than I knew the back of my own hand. I built it from the ground up. 30 years ago, I started selling my grandmother's peach cobbler and blackened catfish out of the trunk of a beat-up Chevy. Today, I was the premier caterer for Atlanta's elite, corporate galas, high society weddings, and charity balls. I wore my chef's coat like a suit of armor, my natural hair pulled back neatly, a few silver strands weaving through the coils, catching the fluorescent light. "Rico, watch the heat on that roux," I called out, wiping my hands on a towel. "If it burns, we throw it out and start over. We don't serve shortcuts here." "Yes, Chef Serena," Rico called back, whisking faster. I took a deep breath, letting the familiar, comforting chaos of my business wash over me. This company was my first baby. Marcus and I had never been blessed with children, a point of silent, lingering sorrow in the early years of our marriage. So I had poured every ounce of my maternal instinct, my sweat, and my tears into this catering empire. It was my legacy. Speak of the devil. The heavy double doors of the kitchen swung open, and the humid, savory air was suddenly cut by the crisp, expensive scent of Tom Ford cologne. Marcus stepped into the kitchen, looking like he had just walked out of a GQ magazine for distinguished older gentlemen. At 60, my husband was still a painfully handsome man. He wore a custom-tailored linen shirt, sharply pressed slacks, and Italian leather loafers that had never seen a hard day's work. Marcus had retired 2 years ago from a mid-level management position at a logistics firm. He had always been a man concerned with appearances, with projecting the image of black excellence, wealth, and stability. "Morning, beautiful," Marcus said, his baritone voice smooth as dark liquor. He didn't come in for a hug. He rarely did these days, claiming the kitchen smelled too strongly of onions and grease. But he offered a charming, practiced smile. "Morning, Marcus," I replied, checking a clipboard of orders. "What brings you down here so early? You usually don't leave the country club before noon." "Just wanted to check in on my gorgeous wife," he said, casually leaning against a stainless steel counter, careful not to get flour on his sleeve. "And to remind you about the meeting with the event coordinator at the Biltmore Hotel at 2 o'clock. We need to finalize the deposit for the Pearl anniversary." Ah, yes, the Pearl anniversary. 30 years of marriage. If I were being honest, I would have been perfectly happy renting a nice beach house in Tybee Island, drinking some good wine, and reflecting on 3 decades of life together. But Marcus wouldn't hear of it. 30 years is an institution, Serena, he had told me weeks ago, pacing our living room. People look up to us in our church, in our community. We are the gold standard. We need to celebrate it properly. A grand ballroom, a live band, 150 of our closest friends and colleagues. I had relented, as I often did when it came to Marcus's need for public validation. I was the breadwinner now, making 3 times what his pension paid out, but I always made sure Marcus felt like the king of the castle. It was an unspoken rule in our marriage. I made the money, and Marcus managed our image. "I haven't forgotten, Marcus," I said, suppressing a tired sigh. "I've got the Biltmore meeting on my calendar. I'll swing by there right after the lunch rush." "Make sure you get the platinum package, Serena," he insisted, his tone carrying a subtle, nagging edge. "The one with the champagne tower and the imported orchids. My mother is flying in from Chicago, and you know how she talks. I won't have her going back and telling the family we threw a cheap party." "We are not throwing a cheap party, Marcus. The platinum package is $50,000. That's a down payment on a house." His jaw tightened slightly, a fleeting look of annoyance flashing across his perfectly groomed features. "You work too hard to count pennies, Serena. You deserve a night to shine. We deserve it. Don't be so stingy with our milestone." The word stingy stung. I wasn't stingy. I was responsible. But before I could argue, he checked his Rolex. "I've got to run, meeting some guys for a round of golf. I'll see you at home tonight. Love you." "Love you too," I murmured as the doors swung shut behind him. I stood there for a moment, the bustling sounds of my kitchen fading into a dull buzz. There was a hollow feeling in my chest that had been growing for the last few years. Marcus and I were like 2 actors who had played the same roles for so long, we had forgotten who we were off stage. He was the doting, distinguished husband in public. At home, he was distant, preoccupied, always on his phone, always finding minor faults in my appearance or my tone. I chalked it up to the pains of aging and retirement. I told myself that 30 years of marriage wasn't a fairy tale. It was endurance. By 2 p.m., I had traded my chef's coat for a tailored emerald green dress. I walked into the grand lobby of the Biltmore Hotel, my heels clicking confidently against the marble floor. The crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow, and despite my reservations about the cost, a small part of me felt a flutter of excitement. 30 years. We had survived recessions, family deaths, and the sheer weight of time. Maybe Marcus was right. Maybe we did need to celebrate our survival. I sat in the plush office of Eleanor, the Biltmore's senior event coordinator. She was a bubbly woman with a clipboard full of swatches and menus. "Mrs. Price, I am so thrilled to finalize this," Eleanor beamed, sliding a heavy ivory-colored contract across the mahogany desk. "Your husband has exquisite taste. The white Phalaenopsis orchids, the vintage Dom Perignon for the toast, the 6-tier cake. It is going to be the event of the season." "Marcus does love a good show," I chuckled politely, pulling my reading glasses from my purse. I skimmed the contract. The total made my breath catch slightly in my throat. $54,200. It was exorbitant. But my catering business had had a record-breaking year. The joint savings account we used for large expenses had over $150,000 in it. We could afford it. "All right, Eleanor, let's make it happen," I said, pulling out my Black American Express Business Platinum card. It was linked directly to my main business account, which Marcus also had access to as the company's nominal financial advisor. Eleanor took the card with a bright smile and swiped it through the terminal on her desk. We made small talk about the band selection while waiting for the receipt to print. But the machine didn't print. It beeped, a sharp, discordant sound. Eleanor frowned, looking at the screen. "Oh, that's odd. It says transaction declined." I laughed, feeling a flush of heat rise to my cheeks. "Declined? That's impossible. Must be a fraud alert. You know how these banks are with large transactions. Run it again, please." She swiped it again. Beep, declined. Insufficient funds. The heat in my cheeks turned into a prickling sweat. Insufficient funds? My voice was tight. "There must be a glitch with the machine, Eleanor. There is more than enough in that account. Let me give you my personal debit card. It's tied to our joint savings." I dug into my purse, my hands shaking slightly, and handed her my Chase Sapphire debit card. Eleanor swiped it. The machine thought for a second. Beep, declined. "Please contact bank." Eleanor looked at me, a mixture of pity and professional awkwardness in her eyes. "Mrs. Price, I'm so sorry. Would you like to call your bank? Or perhaps we can reschedule the deposit for another day?" The humiliation was a physical weight pressing down on my chest. I was Serena Price. I ran a multi-million-dollar catering business. I did not get my cards declined. I apologize, Eleanor. There has been a terrible mistake at the bank. Let me go sort this out right now. I will wire you the money before the end of the business day." I gathered my purse, keeping my head held high, and walked out of the office. But the moment the heavy glass doors of the hotel closed behind me, my composed facade cracked. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded my veins. I sat in the driver's seat of my Mercedes, pulling out my phone. I logged into my Chase banking app, tied up. The Face ID unlocked and the dashboard loaded. I stared at the screen. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and stared again. The numbers weren't making sense. Joint checking, $412.50. Joint savings, $1,200. Business operating account, minus $340. Overdrawn. I stopped breathing. Where was my money? Where was the $150,000 in savings? Where was the $80,000 operating capital for the catering business? My hands trembled so violently I dropped my phone into the passenger footwell. I scrambled to pick it up, my mind racing through 1,000 terrifying scenarios. Had we been hacked? Was it identity theft? Did one of my vendors accidentally charge me 100 times over? I didn't call Marcus. Something deep inside my gut, an intuition honed by years of reading people in the business world, told me not to make that call just yet. Instead, I started the engine and drove straight to the main branch of Chase Bank in downtown Atlanta. The air conditioning in the bank was freezing, but I was sweating through my silk blouse. I bypassed the teller line and walked directly to the desk of Mr. Henderson, the branch manager who had handled my accounts for a decade. "Serena, Mr. Henderson said, standing up with a welcoming smile. "It's good to see you. How is the catering business? I still dream about those crab cakes you made for our corporate retreat." "David," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "something is wrong. My cards were just declined. I checked my app and my accounts are wiped out. Hundreds of thousands of dollars are missing. I need you to tell me if I've been hacked." David's smile vanished instantly. "Sit down, Serena. Let me pull up your profile immediately." He typed rapidly on his keyboard. The click-clack of the keys sounded like a ticking clock. I watched his face. I saw the moment his brow furrowed. I saw the moment his eyes widened behind his glasses. And then I saw the worst expression of all, a look of deep, uncomfortable hesitation. "Serena," David started, his voice dropping an octave, "you haven't been hacked. Your credentials weren't compromised." "Then where is my money, David?" I demanded, my voice rising in the quiet bank. He turned his monitor toward me. "The funds were transferred out over the last 3 months in a series of wire transfers. They were all authorized, properly authenticated." "Authorized by who? I didn't sign off on any wire transfers." David looked at me, swallowing hard. "Authorized by Marcus. He has full signatory rights on the joint accounts, and he is listed as a co-signer on the business operating account." The room spun. "Marcus? Why would Marcus wire our savings? Where did it go?" David pointed to a line item on the screen. "The funds, approximately $150,000 from savings and $80,000 from the business account, were wired to a corporate account under the name Apex Elite Fitness LLC. But Serena, that's not the worst of it." My stomach plummeted. What could possibly be worse than my husband draining our life savings? David hesitated, pulling up another screen. "Last month, Marcus came into the branch. He initiated a home equity line of credit, HELOC, on your primary residence, as well as a commercial business loan leveraged against the assets of Serena's Signature Catering. Since his name is on the deed and the business license as a co-owner, he was legally permitted to do so." I felt the blood drain from my face. I gripped the edge of the mahogany desk to keep from falling out of the chair. "How much, David? How much did he borrow?" $200,000, David said softly. "And that money was also immediately dispersed to Apex Elite Fitness LLC. The loans are active, Serena, and the first payment is due next week. If it's not paid, the bank can put a lien on your business and your home." I couldn't speak. The air had been sucked out of the room. My husband of 30 years, the man who had kissed my cheek that morning and demanded a $50,000 party to celebrate our perfect marriage, had systematically, quietly, and legally robbed me blind. He had mortgaged the house I paid for. He had leveraged the business I built from the trunk of a Chevy. For a gym? Apex Elite Fitness? What was going on? Marcus didn't even lift weights. He played golf and complained about his sciatica. "Is there any way to reverse it?" I choked out, my throat tight with unshed tears. "It's fraud, David. I didn't know about this." "Legally, it's not fraud," David explained gently, his eyes full of sympathy. "In the eyes of the law, it's marital property. He had the legal right to move the funds and secure the loans. If you want to dispute this, Serena, this isn't a banking issue anymore. It's a family law issue. You need an attorney." I sat in the cold, sterile office of the bank, the reality of my life shattering like cheap glass. 25 minutes ago, my biggest problem was choosing between a live jazz band or a string quartet for an anniversary party. Now I was standing on the precipice of total financial ruin. "Who are you, Marcus?" I thought, my mind racing. "What have you done?" I thanked David, standing up on legs that felt like lead. I walked out of the bank and got back into my car. I didn't cry. The shock was too deep for tears. Instead, an unfamiliar, icy calm washed over me. Marcus thought I was just his docile, hard-working wife. He thought I was so busy in the kitchen that I wouldn't notice him dismantling my empire brick by brick. He had mistaken my love for stupidity. I picked up my phone from the floorboard. I didn't call Marcus. I opened my browser and searched for the name David had given me. Apex Elite Fitness LLC, Atlanta. The search results loaded. It was a high-end private boutique gym in Midtown. I clicked on the About Us page. A photo loaded on the screen. It wasn't a corporate board or a group of investors. It was a picture of a single man. He was young, maybe early 30s. Light skin, heavily tattooed arms, an aspiring fitness influencer smile, and abs that looked carved out of stone. The caption beneath the photo read, Julian Vance, founder and head trainer. I stared at the picture of Julian Vance. My husband had drained over $400,000 of my life's work and handed it to this young man. The grief that had been trying to claw its way up my throat evaporated, replaced instantly by a burning, laser-focused rage. The woman who had built a multi-million-dollar business from a rusted Chevy trunk was not a victim. I was a survivor. I put the car in drive. I wasn't going back to the kitchen. I wasn't going to the Biltmore. I was going to Midtown. I needed to see this $400,000 investment with my own two eyes. Midtown Atlanta was a different world from the bustling, flour-dusted reality of my commercial kitchen. It was all glass, steel, and young professionals sipping $7 cold brews. I parked my Mercedes across the street from the address listed for Apex Elite Fitness LLC. It wasn't just a gym, it was a boutique wellness center. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased rows of imported Italian spin bikes and sleek Pilates reformers. The lighting was moody, neon blue and purple, pulsing like a high-end nightclub. And right there, standing near the reception desk made of reclaimed wood, was Julian Vance. He looked exactly like his photo, only more animated. He was wearing a tight black athletic shirt that left nothing to the imagination, laughing with a wealthy-looking middle-aged white woman as he handed her a towel. He oozed a manufactured predatory charm. I sat in my car, my hands gripping the leather steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. $400,000. My life's work. The early mornings, the burns on my arms, the missed vacations, the sheer exhaustion of building an empire as a black woman in the South. Marcus had taken all of it and handed it to this boy so he could play pretend entrepreneur. My first instinct, the fiery Southside Atlanta instinct I had spent decades polishing away, was to march through those glass doors, grab a kettlebell, and smash everything in sight until someone gave me my money back. But I didn't move. You don't build a catering empire by throwing tantrums. You build it by executing a flawless recipe. I put the car in gear and drove away. I needed a different kind of kitchen and a very different set of ingredients. The next morning, I sat in the austere, mahogany-paneled conference room of Sterling and Hayes, the most ruthless family law firm in Fulton County. Across from me sat Diane Sterling, a woman known in Atlanta's elite circles as the Black Widow of Buckhead. She was expensive, terrifying, and exactly what I needed. I laid out the bank statements, the loan documents, and the picture of Julian Vance. I didn't cry. I spoke with the clinical precision of a chef dissecting a bad cut of meat. Diane steepled her manicured fingers, her eyes scanning the documents. Georgia is an equitable distribution state, Serena. That means marital assets are divided fairly, but not necessarily equally. However, what Marcus has done here is called the dissipation of marital assets. He is draining the estate for non-marital purposes. I want it back, Diane, I said, my voice cold and flat. I want the business secured, I want the house protected, and I want him to leave with exactly what he brought into this marriage 30 years ago. Nothing. To do that, Diane said, leaning forward, we need airtight proof of his relationship with this Julian Vance. We need to prove the money wasn't a legitimate business investment gone wrong, but a gift to a paramour. And most importantly, Serena, you cannot let Marcus know that you know. He has to believe his plan is working perfectly. If he smells a rat, he could offshore the remaining funds or file for bankruptcy to tie up the business. I can play the part, I assured her. Diane nodded and slid a business card across the table. Call this number. It belongs to a private investigator named Leon. He's ex-Atlanta PD. He specializes in financial infidelity. Have him track Marcus's movements and run a deep background check on Mr. Vance. While he does that, I'll prepare the forensic accountants to audit your catering company to isolate the fraud. Playing the part of the oblivious, doting wife was the hardest performance of my life. For the next 2 weeks, I cooked Marcus his favorite meals. I smiled when he kissed my cheek. I sat on the couch with him and looked at flower arrangements for the upcoming Pearl anniversary party, agreeing to every ridiculous, overpriced suggestion he made. I was thinking we should upgrade the band to a 10-piece orchestra, Marcus said one evening, swirling a glass of scotch. Julian, my business partner at the gym, I told you about him. He knows a great booking agent. He said it would elevate the whole aesthetic. My stomach performed a sickening flip at the mention of the name, but I kept my face entirely neutral. That sounds lovely, Marcus. If you think we can afford it, let's do it. Of course we can afford it, He scoffed softly, a hint of condescension in his tone. You just focus on looking beautiful, Serena. I handle the finances. It took everything in my power not to throw my glass of wine in his face. Later that night, after Marcus had gone to bed, complaining of a migraine, I crept into his home office. Leon, the private investigator, had told me to look for secondary devices. Liars compartmentalize, he had said. They keep their real lives off their main phones. I searched his desk drawers, his golf bag, the pockets of his winter coats. Nothing. Finally, I looked at the bottom bookshelf, behind a stack of thick, unread biographies. My fingers brushed against cold metal. An iPad. I pulled it out. It was locked with a passcode. I tried his birthday. Incorrect. Our anniversary. Incorrect. His mother's birthday. Incorrect. I paused, thinking about the sheer narcissism of the man I had married. I thought about the day he got the promotion to regional manager, the day he felt like a king. October 14th. I typed in 1014. The screen unlocked. My heart hammered against my ribs as I opened his messages. There were hundreds of texts to a contact named JV. JV, the contractor needs another $50,000 for the sauna installation, babe. You promised. Marcus, I'm working on it. The bitch is watching the catering accounts closer than usual, but the HELOC money should clear the secondary account by Friday. JV, you better. I'm tired of hiding. When are you dropping the bomb? Marcus, at the anniversary party. It's perfect. She'll be so blindsided and humiliated in front of the pastor and the community, she won't dare put up a fight in the divorce. She cares too much about her precious reputation. Reading the words was like taking a physical blow to the chest. The bitch. 30 years of devotion, and I was just an obstacle between him and his young lover. But the texts weren't the worst part. I opened an app labeled Voice Memos. There were dozens of audio files, all dated over the last 6 months. I put in a single earbud and pressed play on a file named evidence_1. I heard my own voice, sounding shrill, angry, and unhinged. You are worthless. I do everything around here. I make the money. I pay the bills. You are nothing but a parasite. If you ever try to leave me, I will destroy you. I froze in absolute horror. When had I ever said that? I clicked another file. Don't you dare touch me. You sicken me. I'll ruin your life if you cross me. Then the realization hit me with the force of a freight train. These were heavily edited. I remembered the first conversation. It was from 3 months ago. Marcus had intentionally ruined a batch of expensive saffron I had brought home for a private client, casually throwing it in the trash. I had yelled, "Why would you do that? That was worth hundreds of dollars. I do everything around here to keep this business afloat." He had taken my voice, chopped it up using an audio editing app on the iPad, and spliced the words together to make me sound like a volatile, financially abusive monster. He wasn't just planning to leave me. He was gaslighting me. He was building a fabricated legal defense to present to a judge, or worse, to our community, claiming that I was an abuser, justifying his need to secretly siphon money to escape a toxic marriage. He wanted to ruin my catering business's reputation, paint himself as a battered, closeted victim, and walk away with the sympathy and the cash. Tears finally spilled hot and fast down my cheeks, but they weren't tears of heartbreak. They were tears of pure, unadulterated fury. I emailed all the files and screenshots to Diane and Leon, wiped the iPad screen clean of my fingerprints, and put it exactly back where I found it. 2 days later, Leon called me with an address. It was a luxury high-rise apartment building in Buckhead. "He's heading there now, Mrs. Price," Leon said over the phone. "Apartment 14B. It's leased under Julian Vance's name, but the rent is being paid from the Apex Elite corporate account." "I'm on my way," I said. I parked down the street and slipped into the building behind a food delivery driver. My heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against my breastbone as I rode the elevator up to the 14th floor. The hallway was quiet, lined with thick, sound-absorbing carpet. I found 14B. The door was heavy oak, but it was cracked open just a sliver. Perhaps Marcus had been in a rush, or they were expecting another delivery. I stood in the hallway, pressing my back against the wall, and listened. I heard music playing softly, and then the sound of Marcus's voice. It wasn't the deep, commanding tone he used with me. It was softer, almost pleading. "I'm doing everything as fast as I can, Julian. You have to be patient." "Patient?" Julian's voice was sharp, whiny, and demanding. Marcus, you're 60 years old. I'm putting my youth on hold for you. You said the catering business was a gold mine, but this $200,000 loan? It's peanuts. I need the rest of the equity from the house before you blow this up at the party. I will, Marcus promised, his voice sickeningly desperate. The audio files are ready. I played them for my lawyer. He said with the narrative of her being a controlling, emotionally abusive wife who forced me into the closet, no judge will fault me for securing funds to start a new life. By the time I make the announcement at the Pearl Party, Serena will be so broken by the public shame, she'll sign whatever settlement I put in front of her just to make it go away. She better, Julian sneered, because I'm not spending the rest of my life in Atlanta hiding in this apartment. We're taking the money to Miami, Marcus, just like you promised. I heard the clinking of glasses, the murmur of a kiss. I closed my eyes, leaning against the cold wallpaper of the hallway. The final piece of my 30-year marriage broke off and turned to ash. There was no love left to mourn. There was no history left to salvage. There was only a parasite draining the lifeblood of my legacy. I didn't kick the door in. I didn't scream. I pulled out my phone, hit record, and captured the last 2 minutes of their conversation through the crack in the door. I saved the file, turned around, and walked back to the elevator with the silent, deadly grace of a panther. The next afternoon, I sat in Leon's cramped, smoky office. He slid a thick manila folder across his messy desk. You held it together well at the apartment, Serena, Leon said, his gruff voice laced with respect. Most people would have caught a domestic assault charge right then and there. I don't look good in orange jumpsuits, Leon, I replied, opening the folder. What did you find on Julian Vance? Leon let out a dry, humorless chuckle. Julian Vance isn't his real name. It's Julian Velez, and he is not a fitness entrepreneur. I looked down at the documents. Mugshots stared back at me. A younger Julian, a slightly older Julian. He's a professional grifter, Leon explained, pointing a thick finger at the rap sheet. 3 felony convictions in Florida and Texas, wire fraud, extortion, and grand theft. His MO is identical every time. He targets wealthy, older, closeted married men. He plays the loving, supportive younger boyfriend, convinces them to leverage their marital assets to invest in a fake business, and the moment the cash is liquid, he vanishes into thin air. I stared at the rap sheet, a cold, dark smile slowly spreading across my face. Marcus, the man who thought he was the smartest person in any room, the man who thought he was playing a master game of chess with my life, was actually getting played by a 2-bit hustler. So, I murmured, tracing the edge of Julian's mugshot. Julian is planning to take the $400,000 and run, and Marcus is planning to humiliate me at our anniversary to keep the rest. That's the play, Leon nodded. What's our counter move? I closed the folder, the Southside Atlanta fire now burning with a refined, calculated heat. Marcus wants a show, I said quietly, the dark smile cementing into something lethal. He wants an audience. He wants a spectacle at the Pearl anniversary. I stood up, adjusting my designer blazer. Then I am going to give him the greatest performance this city has ever seen. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in psychological warfare. To the outside world, and more importantly to Marcus, I was Serena Price, the devoted, slightly oblivious wife, excitedly finalizing the details of our grand Pearl anniversary. Behind the scenes, I was a general orchestrating a financial and legal siege. Diane Sterling, my attorney, moved with the quiet, lethal efficiency of a heat-seeking missile. "We've filed an ex parte motion under seal," Diane told me over a secure line late one Tuesday evening. "A judge has reviewed the forensic accounting, the doctored audio files, and Julian Velez's criminal record. We have a temporary restraining order on the dissipation of any further marital assets. The bank has been notified. But here is the crucial part, Serena. The freeze on the accounts won't execute until 8 p.m. on the night of your anniversary party." "Why the delay?" I asked, looking over the catering orders for the next day. "Because Julian is a flight risk," she explained. "If he gets spooked and tries to wire the remaining capital out of the Apex Elite accounts before we have him dead to rights, it will be a nightmare to recover it from offshore. We want him comfortable. We want him at the party, feeling victorious. When the clock strikes 8, the trap snaps shut. The accounts freeze, and Marcus is officially served with a civil suit for fraud and a divorce petition citing financial abuse." It was brilliant. It was terrifying. It was perfect. That evening at home, Marcus was in a predictably foul mood, complaining about the dry cleaning of his custom tuxedo. I poured him a glass of Macallan and sat beside him on our cream-colored sofa. "Darling," I said softly, resting my hand on his knee. "I was looking over the final guest list for Saturday. We have plenty of room at the front tables. I really think you should invite Julian." Marcus froze, his glass hovering inches from his lips. He looked at me, a flicker of genuine panic breaking through his polished veneer. "Julian? My business partner? Why on earth would we invite him to a family event?" "Because he's important to you," I smiled, projecting nothing but warmth and wifely support. "You've been working so hard on this new gym venture. He's a part of our success now. Besides, I want to formally meet the young man you've been spending so much time with. It would be rude to exclude him from our milestone." I watched the gears turning in Marcus's head. I could almost see the sinister logic forming behind his eyes. In his twisted narrative, having his young lover present while he humiliated his oppressive wife would be the ultimate power move. It would be his grand cinematic exit. "You know what, Serena?" Marcus finally said, a slow, predatory smile creeping onto his face. "You're right. You are absolutely right. I'll make sure Julian is there." "Wonderful," I murmured, taking a sip of my own wine. "It's going to be a night no one will ever forget." Saturday arrived, draped in the heavy, humid elegance of an Atlanta evening. The grand ballroom of the Biltmore Hotel was a vision of opulence. Thousands of white Phalaenopsis orchids cascaded from crystal vases on every table. The lighting was bathed in a soft, pearlescent glow, and a 10-piece jazz orchestra played a smooth rendition of Etta James in the corner. I stood near the entrance, wearing a custom-made off-the-shoulder gown in deep sapphire blue. I looked regal. I felt like a gladiator stepping into the Colosseum. 150 guests milled about, sipping vintage Dom Perignon. My catering staff, whom I had given the night off with full pay, were there in their finest clothes. Our pastor, Reverend Stokes, was holding court near the buffet, and sitting front and center at the VIP table was Marcus's mother, Celeste. Celeste was a stern, deeply conservative woman who wore a church hat to grocery stores. She had never quite forgiven me for being a working woman instead of a traditional housewife, but she loved her son blindly. "Serena," Celeste said as I approached her table, her eyes scanning my dress critically. "Very flashy. Let's hope the food is as good as the decor. 30 years is a long time to keep a man like my Marcus happy." "Oh, Celeste," I replied, my voice smooth as silk. "Marcus is about to be happier than he's ever been. Just wait for the speeches." From the corner of my eye, I saw them. Marcus was working the room, shaking hands, playing the distinguished patriarch. And hovering near the bar, looking entirely out of place in a flashy maroon velvet blazer, was Julian. I excused myself from Celeste and walked directly over to the bar. Julian was tossing back a shot of tequila when he saw me approach. He quickly arranged his face into a mask of polite professional charm. "You must be Serena," he said, flashing those perfectly veneered teeth. "Julian Vance. Marcus has told me so much about you." "I bet he has," I thought. "Did he tell you I'm the one funding that blazer?" "Julian, it is a pleasure," I said, extending my hand. His grip was firm, overly confident. "Marcus speaks very highly of your assets. Thank you for coming. I hope you enjoy the show tonight." "I wouldn't miss it for the world," Julian smirked, his eyes darting toward Marcus with a look of shared, sickening complicity. At 7:45 p.m., dinner was cleared. The room buzzed with the warm, contented hum of well-fed guests. I discreetly checked my Apple Watch. 15 minutes until the bank freeze initiated. I caught the eye of the AV technician at the back of the room, a young man I had personally handed a $2,000 cash tip earlier that afternoon. He gave me a subtle nod. Everything was loaded. The orchestra brought the music to a gentle halt. Marcus stood up from the head table, tapping a silver spoon against his crystal champagne flute. The room quieted down, turning their attention to the man of the hour. Marcus took the microphone. He looked incredibly handsome under the spotlight, a tragic, heroic figure of his own making. "Family, friends, colleagues," Marcus began, his voice rich and resonant, echoing perfectly through the ballroom. "Thank you all for being here tonight to commemorate 30 years of marriage." Polite applause rippled through the crowd. Marcus took a deep, shaky breath, looking down at his shoes before raising his eyes to the crowd. He was acting his heart out. 30 years is a long time. It is a lifetime. But tonight, I have to be honest. With myself, with God, and with all of you. The room grew so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Reverend Stokes leaned forward, frowning. Celeste clutched her pearl necklace. For 3 decades I have lived a lie, Marcus continued, his voice trembling with manufactured emotion. He turned his gaze toward me, pointing a trembling finger. I have played the part of the perfect husband to a woman who has suffocated me. Serena has controlled my life, my finances, and my spirit. I have lived in fear of her temper, her emotional abuse, and her dominance. A collective gasp swept through the room. My own staff looked at me in horror. Celeste let out a loud, dramatic sigh as if to say I knew it. But the deepest lie, Marcus said, tears genuinely welling in his eyes now, is who I am. I cannot live in this prison anymore. I am a gay man, and I have found someone who finally shows me what true love and freedom look like. He gestured grandly toward the back of the room, where Julian was standing, trying to look appropriately solemn and supportive. I am filing for divorce, Marcus announced, dropping the bomb squarely in the middle of the Biltmore. I have secured funds to start a new life, a truthful life. I know this is shocking, but I beg for your understanding as I escape this toxic environment. The silence in the ballroom was deafening, heavy, and suffocating. People were staring at me with a mixture of shock, pity, and outright disgust. Marcus stood there, breathing heavily, looking like a martyr who had just slain his dragon. He had done it. He had played the victim flawlessly. I slowly stood up from my chair. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I smoothed the skirt of my sapphire gown, walked over to Marcus, and gently but firmly took the microphone from his sweating hand. Wow, I said, my voice echoing through the silent room. I sounded incredibly calm, almost amused. What a performance, Marcus. You almost had me in tears. Marcus frowned, his brow furrowing in confusion. This wasn't the script. I was supposed to be weeping, running out of the room in shame. I turned to the sea of shocked faces. Family friends, I want to make one thing perfectly clear. I have absolutely no issue with Marcus being a gay man. Living your truth is a beautiful thing. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. What I do have an issue with, my voice dropped an octave, turning to cold steel, is a thief and a liar. I looked at the AV technician in the back of the room and nodded. Suddenly, the massive projector screen behind the stage hummed to life. The lights dimmed. A massive high-definition image flashed onto the screen for all 150 guests to see. It was a Chase Bank statement. I pointed at the screen. You see, while Marcus was suffocating in our marriage, he was busy forging my signature to take out a $200,000 mortgage on our home and my catering business. He also drained $150,000 from our life savings. The crowd erupted in frantic whispers. Celeste stood up, her face pale. Marcus, what is she talking about? Serena, stop this right now, Marcus hissed, lunging for the microphone. I stepped back smoothly, my heels planting firmly into the stage. Next slide, please, I said. The screen changed. It was a split screen. On the left was the audio editing software from Marcus's iPad. On the right was the original unedited audio file. Marcus claimed I was emotionally abusive, I told the crowd. He even played heavily edited tapes for his lawyer. Let's listen to the raw audio, shall we? The speakers crackled. My voice filled the room. Why would you do that? That was worth hundreds of dollars. I do everything around here to keep this business afloat. Then the edited version played. I do everything around here. If you ever try to leave me, I will destroy you. The manipulation was so obvious, so clumsy, that a collective groan of disgust rippled through the audience. Marcus took a step back, his face draining of all color. He looked like a man who had just stepped on a landmine and heard the click. You've been gaslighting me for months to build a fake legal defense, I said, turning to look my husband dead in the eyes. You tried to destroy my reputation to justify stealing my money. Serena, please, Marcus stammered, his voice small, pathetic. The Grand Patriarch had vanished, leaving only a terrified, cornered little boy. But the best part of this whole tragic comedy, I continued, turning my attention to the back of the room, is your savior, the man you sacrificed 30 years of marriage and $400,000 for. Next slide, I commanded. The screen flashed again. A collective gasp tore through the room that was twice as loud as the first one. Projected 10 feet tall on the screen were 3 distinct police mugshots. Underneath them was a rap sheet from the Florida Department of Corrections. "Meet Julian Vance," I announced, pointing directly at the man in the maroon blazer. Or should I say Julian Velez, a convicted felon with 3 counts of wire fraud and extortion. His specialty? Finding closeted, wealthy older men, convincing them to steal from their wives to fund a fake business, and then running away with the cash. All eyes turned to the back of the room. Julian's smug mask had completely shattered. He looked like a deer in headlights. He took 1 step backward toward the exit doors. I checked my watch. 8:01 p.m. "Don't bother running to the bank, Julian," I said, my voice cutting through the rising chaos of the room like a freshly sharpened chef's knife. "As of 1 minute ago, a federal judge has frozen the Apex Elite business accounts. The money you two stole is locked down, and the civil lawsuit for financial fraud and embezzlement was just filed." I turned back to Marcus, who was visibly shaking, sweat pouring down his forehead, ruining his expensive facial. "You wanted an audience, Marcus?" I whispered, dropping the microphone onto the floor. The feedback shrieked, making several guests wince. "You've got one. Happy anniversary." I didn't look back. I picked up the train of my sapphire gown and walked down the center aisle of the ballroom. I walked past my cheering sous chefs, past a horrified Reverend Stokes, and past an utterly broken Julian Velez. I walked out of the Biltmore Hotel and out of a 30-year lie, stepping into the warm Atlanta night, feeling lighter, richer, and more powerful than I ever had in my life. I didn't make it all the way to the valet stand. The heavy, brass-handled glass doors of the Biltmore Ballroom swung shut behind me, muting the pandemonium inside. But I stopped in the grand marble-floored foyer. The cool air conditioning brushed against my heated skin. I turned around and watched through the glass. After 30 years of being the dutiful wife, the silent engine behind a man's hollow facade, I felt I had earned the right to watch the house of cards collapse. Inside the ballroom, the silence that had followed my departure had violently shattered. It was a symphony of chaos. Marcus was stranded in the center of the room, looking like a captain going down with a very expensive, very public sinking ship. He spun around, his frantic eyes landing on Julian. He lunged toward the younger man, grabbing the lapels of Julian's velvet blazer. "Julian!" Marcus's voice, though muffled by the glass, carried the shrill pitch of utter desperation. Tell them it's a misunderstanding. Tell them about the business." Julian ripped Marcus's hands off his coat with a look of profound disgust. The manufactured charm, the sweet, supportive boyfriend act, it all melted away, revealing the cold, calculating grifter underneath. "Get off me, you old fool," Julian sneered, his voice loud enough to echo over the murmuring crowd. He aggressively straightened his lapels. "You really thought this was a romance? You were a mark, Marcus. An easy, arrogant, pathetic mark." Marcus stumbled back as if he had been physically struck. "But the money, the gym, we're going to Miami." Julian let out a sharp, cruel laugh. "You think I didn't notice your wife parked across the street from the gym 2 weeks ago? I knew the clock was ticking. That bank account your wife just froze, it only has the $150,000 from your savings." Marcus went completely pale, his knees visibly buckling. What do you mean?" "I mean," Julian said, taking a step backward toward the side exit, "I wired the $200,000 from the HELOC loan to a private offshore crypto wallet yesterday morning. It's gone, Marcus. Untraceable. Thanks for the severance package. Have fun paying off that mortgage on your own." A collective gasp went up from the front tables. Marcus dropped to his knees, his hands clutching his head. He had sacrificed his marriage, his reputation, and his entire life's work, only to be left holding a $250,000 bag of debt for a man who despised him. Julian turned on his heel and sprinted for the ballroom's side exit. But my preparation had been absolute. As Julian burst through the doors into the side corridor, he didn't find the freedom of the Atlanta night. He found Leon, my private investigator, standing shoulder to shoulder with 2 uniformed officers from the Atlanta Police Department. "Julian Velez," one of the officers said, stepping forward. "We have a warrant for your arrest regarding interstate wire fraud and violation of parole. Put your hands where I can see them." I watched as the color drained from the grifter's face. The handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists with a satisfying metallic finality. He was dragged away, his velvet blazer entirely losing its luster. Back in the ballroom, Marcus was hyperventilating on the floor. His perfect tuxedo was rumpled, his dignity entirely evaporated. The guests were already grabbing their coats and purses, eager to escape the radioactive fallout of the Price family scandal. But one person had not moved. Celeste Price. Marcus's mother stood slowly from her seat at the VIP table. She was trembling, leaning heavily on her mahogany cane. For 30 years, Celeste had treated me with a thinly veiled condescension, always implying I was never quite good enough for her polished, successful son. Marcus looked up at her, tears streaming down his face. Mom, please, they're lying. She set me up. Mom, you have to help me. The sea of remaining guests parted as the 70-year-old matriarch walked slowly toward her son. The room held its collective breath. Everyone knew Celeste's conservative, deeply religious nature. Everyone expected her to condemn his sexuality, to scream at him for the shame he had brought upon their church. Celeste stopped in front of Marcus. She looked down at the weeping, broken man on the floor. Stand up, she commanded, her voice weak but carrying the undeniable authority of a Southern mother. Marcus scrambled to his feet, wiping his nose on his silk sleeve like a toddler. Mom, Smack. The sound of Celeste's palm connecting with Marcus's cheek was as loud as a gunshot. Marcus reeled backward, clutching his face in absolute shock. Don't you dare, Celeste hissed, her voice trembling with a rage so deep it seemed to shake her very bones. Don't you dare stand there and lie to me. You think I care who you sleep with? You think I care about your bedroom secrets? The Lord judges the heart, Marcus, and your heart is rotten. Mom, you stole from your own home, Celeste continued, pointing a shaking arthritic finger at his chest. You tried to destroy the reputation of a woman who has washed your clothes, cooked your meals, and funded your lifestyle for 3 decades. You plotted like a common thief in the night. I did not raise a coward, and I certainly did not raise a criminal. She turned her back on him. The ultimate dismissal. Celeste walked slowly toward the glass doors where I was standing. I pushed the doors open, stepping forward to meet her. We looked at each other. There were no tears in her eyes, only a profound, exhausted grief. Serena, Celeste said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. I have been a foolish, proud woman. I favored my blood over my own eyes. I am so sorry. You have nothing to apologize for, Celeste, I said gently, reaching out to squeeze her trembling hand. You didn't know. If there is a trial, Celeste said, her grip surprisingly strong, you tell your lawyer to call me. I will take the stand. I will tell the judge exactly what I saw here tonight. She let go of my hand and walked out into the night, leaving her son behind forever. I watched her go, feeling a profound sense of closure. The war was officially over. I had won. The legal battle over the next 6 months was less of a fight and more of a systematic dismantling. Family court in Fulton County had seen its fair share of messy divorces, but the case of Price versus Price became the stuff of legend in legal circles. Marcus had hired a cheap, desperate defense attorney, the only one he could afford now that our joint accounts were frozen and his credit was destroyed. I, on the other hand, had Diane Sterling. We sat in the sterile, wood-paneled courtroom on a rainy Tuesday in November. Marcus sat across the aisle, looking like a ghost of his former self. His hair had thinned dramatically, the gray no longer distinguished but exhausted. He wore a suit that was a size too big, the fabric hanging off his diminishing frame. His lawyer tried to argue that the $200,000 HELOC loan was marital debt, incurred during the course of the marriage, and therefore I should be responsible for half of the repayment. He even tried, pathetically, to resurrect the narrative of Marcus being a victim of emotional distress who needed the funds to escape. Judge Hernandez, a no-nonsense woman with zero tolerance for theatrics, peered over her glasses at Marcus. Mr. Price, the judge said, her voice cutting through the courtroom. Your counsel seems to be operating under the delusion that I have not reviewed the forensic accounting reports, the police report regarding your accomplice, Mr. Velez, and the sworn affidavit from your own mother. Marcus shrank into his chair, staring at the floor. You did not just incur debt, Judge Hernandez continued, her gavel resting heavily in her hand. You committed blatant financial fraud against your spouse. You forged her signature on business documents to leverage a company she built entirely through her own labor. You orchestrated a malicious campaign to defame her character. The judge looked down at her papers, aligning them perfectly before delivering the final blow. In the matter of the division of assets, the petitioner, Mrs. Serena Price is awarded 100% equity in the primary residence and sole uncontested ownership of Serena's Signature Catering. The remaining $150,000 in the frozen joint savings account is awarded entirely to the petitioner as restitution. Diane Sterling gave me a tiny, imperceptible nod. As for the $200,000 HELOC and commercial loan, the judge concluded, her eyes fixed coldly on Marcus. Due to the fraudulent nature of their acquisition and the clear, malicious dissipation of marital assets, that debt is assigned solely and entirely to the respondent, Mr. Marcus Price. You are ordered to repay the bank in full. Case closed. The gavel struck the sounding block. It was the best sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of my chains breaking. As we walked out of the courthouse, Marcus tried to approach me. He looked desperate, hollowed out. Serena, please. I'm going to have to declare bankruptcy. The bank is going to garnish my pension. I have nothing. I stopped and looked at the man I had spent 30 years of my life with. There was no anger left. There was no love, no hate, no bitterness. There was just an overwhelming, peaceful indifference. You have exactly what you bargained for, Marcus, I said softly. You wanted a new life. Now you have one. I turned and walked to my car, leaving him standing alone in the rain. 2 years later, the air in Paris smelled entirely different than the air in Atlanta. It smelled of espresso, fresh rain on cobblestones, and baking butter. I sat at a small wrought-iron table outside the Café de Flore in the 6th arrondissement, a pristine white porcelain cup of café au lait warming my hands. I was 60 years old. I wore a tailored, cream-colored trench coat, a silk scarf tied effortlessly around my neck, and a pair of dark sunglasses that hid nothing but the bright, undeniable joy in my eyes. My catering business had not just survived the scandal, it had exploded. The story of what happened at the Biltmore Hotel had leaked, as those things inevitably do in high society, but instead of ruining my reputation, it had canonized me. I became a legend among the wealthy women of Atlanta. Every corporate board, every bride, every charity chairwoman wanted to hire the woman who had elegantly and ruthlessly destroyed a financial predator. Our revenue had doubled in 24 months. I had just promoted Rico to executive chef, stepping back from the daily grind to focus on the big picture. And the big picture was beautiful. I took a sip of my coffee, pulling my phone from my purse. I opened my email. There was a quarterly report from Diane Sterling, who now handled all my corporate legal affairs. Everything was in the green. Out of curiosity, a fleeting, momentary, morbid curiosity, I opened an incognito tab on my browser and typed in Marcus's name. The internet is a ruthless historian. The search yielded a few recent public records. Marcus hadn't been able to declare bankruptcy on the fraud-based debt. The bank had seized his car and was actively garnishing 60% of his monthly pension. He was currently living in a cramped one-bedroom apartment in a rundown suburb of Marietta. The last record was a screenshot from a local rideshare driver directory. There was a photo of him, looking 75 instead of 62, staring blankly into the camera from the driver's seat of a rented high-mileage Nissan Altima. The man who had demanded a $50,000 party to celebrate his ego was now driving drunk college students home for $12 a ride. Julian Velez was currently serving a 7-year sentence in a federal penitentiary in Florida. The $200,000 he had stolen was eventually seized by federal authorities during a crypto exchange raid, though Marcus would never see a dime of it. It all went directly back to the bank to partially satisfy his massive debt. I closed the browser, locked my phone, and dropped it back into my purse. 30 years. I had given 3 decades of my youth, my energy, and my soul to a man who saw me as nothing more than an ATM and a shield for his own cowardice. He had tried to break me. He had tried to strip me of my wealth, my dignity, and my sanity. But he had forgotten one crucial thing. He forgot who he was dealing with. He forgot that I was a black woman from the South who had built an empire from the trunk of a car. I knew how to take raw, bitter ingredients and turn them into a masterpiece. A handsome French waiter in a crisp white apron approached my table, holding a silver tray with a fresh, flaky croissant. Pour vous, madame, he smiled, placing it gently on the table. Enjoy the morning. Merci, I replied, my French accented but confident. I broke off a piece of the warm pastry, looking out at the bustling Parisian street. The sun was breaking through the morning clouds, casting a golden light over the historic architecture. I was alone, but for the first time in 30 years, I wasn't lonely. I was safe. I was wealthy. I was entirely, unapologetically free. I raised my coffee cup in a silent toast to the empty chair across from me. To the truth, I thought, a serene smile touching my lips. It may take its time, but it always serves the best dish. Paris had been the balm my soul needed, a temporary sanctuary of art, butter, and beautiful anonymity. But after 6 months of waking up to the view of the Seine and taking advanced pastry classes at a boutique culinary institute just for the sheer joy of learning, the deep-rooted Southern businesswoman in me began to itch. I wasn't built for a life of permanent leisure. I was a creator. I was a builder. By the time I returned to Atlanta, the city felt different. Or rather, I was different. The phantom weight of Marcus's expectations, the constant need to be the perfect, accommodating wife to a man who secretly despised my success, was entirely gone. In its place was a sharp, unyielding clarity. At 61, I walked back into the pristine kitchens of Serena's Signature Catering not just as a chef, but as a sovereign. Rico, whom I had promoted to executive chef, had kept the empire running flawlessly. Revenue was up, and our client list now included international dignitaries and A-list celebrities filming in the Hollywood of the South. I had more money than I could spend in 2 lifetimes. But as I sat in my corner office overlooking the Atlanta skyline, reviewing quarterly profits, a profound realization washed over me. The universe, or God, or whatever cosmic force balances the scales of justice, had not given me this victory just so I could buy designer bags and take European vacations. I had survived financial assassination because I had the resources, the business acumen, and the sheer grit to fight back. What about the women who didn't? What about the women who had given up their careers to raise children, only to wake up at 55 and find their husbands had drained their joint accounts to fund a midlife crisis? What about the women who were victims of financial gaslighting, convinced by their partners that they were too bad with numbers to understand where the mortgage money was going? That afternoon, I called Diane Sterling. "Diane," I said when she picked up, "I want to start a foundation." "A foundation?" "Serena, you already donate heavily to the food banks. What kind of foundation are you thinking of?" "I want to call it the Phoenix Initiative," I told her, the vision crystallizing in my mind with absolute certainty. "I want to fund a network of forensic accountants, private investigators, and ruthless family law attorneys. I want to provide pro bono legal and financial defense for older women facing financial infidelity and divorce. I want to arm them." Diane laughed, a rich, delighted sound. "Serena Price, you are a menace to crooked husbands everywhere. I love it. Let's draw up the paperwork." The next 2 years were a whirlwind of purpose. The Phoenix Initiative became my second child. We launched quietly at first, helping a few women in my church congregation navigate messy separations where their spouses tried to hide assets in offshore LLCs. But word travels fast in the South. Soon we were handling cases across the state of Georgia. I sat in on support groups, listening to women my age, women in their late 50s and 60s, weep over stolen pensions, secret second families, and mountains of debt forged in their names. I didn't just give them money, I gave them a playbook. I taught them how to pull their credit reports, how to read a balance sheet, and how to look a predatory lawyer in the eye and refuse to blink. I became a different kind of mother to these women. I was living proof that life does not end at 60, and that starting over with nothing but the truth is better than living in a gilded cage built on lies. To celebrate my 63rd birthday and the 2nd anniversary of the Phoenix Initiative, the board of directors insisted on throwing a massive fundraising gala. They booked the grand ballroom at the Biltmore Hotel. When Eleanor, the Biltmore's senior event coordinator, called to confirm the venue, she was hesitant. "Mrs. Price, are you certain you want the Biltmore? Given the history of your last event here?" I smiled into the phone. "Eleanor, I am absolutely certain. You don't let a bad memory ruin a beautiful room. We're going to overwrite that history. Book it, and let's upgrade to the Platinum package." The night of the Phoenix Gala was a crisp, clear evening in late October. The Biltmore looked even more magnificent than it had 5 years ago. This time, there were no white orchids. The room was decorated in rich golds, deep emeralds, and fiery crimson, the colors of rebirth. Over 300 guests were in attendance. There were judges, city councilwomen, the women the foundation had saved, and the brilliant legal minds who fought for them. I was running late. I had spent too much time at home perfecting my look. I was wearing a custom-tailored stark white tuxedo. My silver hair was styled in a sharp, elegant cut. I looked at myself in the hallway mirror and saw a woman who owed absolutely nothing to anyone. My private driver called to inform me that his town car had broken down on the interstate and he was waiting for a tow. "Don't worry about it, Thomas," I told him. "It's just a machine. I'll order a premium rideshare. Get yourself home safe." I opened the app on my phone and ordered a black car service. The app pinged. "Your driver is 3 minutes away." I stepped out into the cool evening air, pulling a faux fur wrap over my shoulders. A sleek black luxury SUV pulled up to the curb. The tinted window rolled down. I reached for the door handle, my mind already on the speech I was about to give. I opened the door and slid into the plush leather back seat. "Good evening," I said, looking at my phone to check an email from Rico about the appetizer service. "The Biltmore Hotel, please." The driver didn't immediately put the car in gear. The silence in the cabin stretched for a second too long. "Serena." The voice was raspy, aged, and entirely stripped of its former arrogant baritone. But it was a voice I had listened to for 30 years. My blood ran cold for a fraction of a second. I slowly lowered my phone and looked up at the rearview mirror. Our eyes met in the reflection. It was Marcus. He was wearing a cheap, ill-fitting black suit. The chauffeur cap sat awkwardly on his head. He had aged 20 years in the span of 5. His face was deeply lined, the skin sallow and tired. The spark of narcissistic superiority that used to dance in his eyes was completely extinguished, replaced by the dull, hollow stare of a man who worked 80 hours a week just to survive. For a moment, the air in the luxury SUV felt suffocatingly thick. The universe truly did have a wicked, poetic sense of humor. Out of all the premium rideshare drivers in the greater Atlanta metropolitan area, the algorithm had assigned my ex-husband to drive me to a gala celebrating his defeat. "Hello, Marcus," I said. My voice was perfectly steady. There was no tremor, no anger, just the calm acknowledgement of a stranger. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. He looked like he wanted to sink into the floorboards. I can cancel the ride, Serena. I didn't see the name until you got in. I'll call you another car." "There's no need," I replied, checking my watch. "I have 300 people waiting for me. Just drive, please." He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. He put the car in gear and pulled away from the curb. The drive to downtown Atlanta took 25 minutes. It was the quietest 25 minutes of my life. I didn't look out the window. I looked at the back of his head. I watched the gray, thinning hair at the nape of his neck. I thought about the man who had stood in that ballroom 5 years ago, wearing a custom tuxedo, trying to publicly execute my character to steal my hard-earned money for a convicted felon. I thought about the sheer terror I had felt in the bank manager's office when I saw my accounts drained. But looking at him now, I felt absolutely nothing. No desire to gloat. No need to rub my white tuxedo in his face. The opposite of love isn't hate. It's indifference. And my indifference was total and complete. We pulled into the grand circular driveway of the Biltmore Hotel. The valet attendants were rushing to open doors for women in glittering gowns and men in sharp suits. The marquee outside read, "The Phoenix Initiative Gala, founded by Serena Price." Marcus put the car in park. He looked at the marquee, and then he looked back at me in the rearview mirror. His eyes were red-rimmed. "Serena," he whispered, his voice cracking. You look incredible." "Thank you," I said smoothly. "I heard about the foundation," he continued, unable to stop himself, his words spilling out like a confession to a priest. "I hear you're helping people. That's good. I just want you to know. Julian is in prison. The bank took everything. I work this job and I bag groceries at Publix on the weekends to pay off the fraud restitution. I lost my mother. She passed away last year. She wouldn't speak to me at the end." A brief flicker of sorrow touched my heart for Celeste. She was a proud woman who died knowing her son was a thief. "I'm sorry to hear about your mother, Marcus," I said softly. "I have nothing," he choked out, a single tear escaping and tracking down his weathered cheek. "I traded a diamond for a handful of dirt. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I threw you away." He was waiting for absolution. He was waiting for the maternal, forgiving Serena to tell him that it was okay, that the past was in the past, that God forgives. But I was no longer the woman who managed his ego to keep the peace. I opened my evening clutch and pulled out a crisp, brand-new $100 bill. I leaned forward and placed it gently on the center console. "The fare is already paid on the app," I said, my voice cool and professional. "This is for your time. Keep the change, Marcus." I opened the door and stepped out into the flashing lights of the Biltmore. I didn't look back as the valet closed the door of the SUV. I didn't watch him drive away into the darkness. I walked up the marble steps, my head held high, leaving the ghost of my past exactly where he belonged, in the rearview mirror. The ballroom was electric. As I walked through the double doors, the crowd erupted into a standing ovation. Diane Sterling met me at the entrance, handing me a glass of champagne. "You're late, Madam Founder," she beamed. "The mayor has been waiting to shake your hand." "Traffic was interesting," I smirked, taking a sip of the vintage Dom Perignon. "But I'm exactly where I need to be." Later that evening, after the multi-course dinner my company had catered to perfection, I was called to the stage. I walked up the same steps Marcus had walked up 5 years ago. I stood behind the same acrylic podium, but the energy in the room wasn't thick with lies and impending betrayal. It was vibrant, supportive, and fiercely alive. I looked out at the sea of faces, specifically the faces of the women in their 50s, 60s, and 70s who had survived the unthinkable. 5 years ago, in this exact room, my life as I knew it ended. I began, my voice echoing clearly through the microphone. The room fell into a respectful silence. I stood here and watched a 30-year marriage dissolve in a spectacle of greed, deceit, and profound disrespect. For a brief moment, I was standing on the edge of a cliff. Society tells women, especially older women, that our value is tied to our marriages. We are told that starting over at 60 is a tragedy. We are told to keep quiet, to accept our lot, to be grateful for whatever scraps of dignity we are left with. I looked over at Diane, who raised her glass to me. "But I am here to tell you tonight that society is wrong," I continued, my voice rising with passionate conviction. "The end of a toxic chapter is not a tragedy. It is an eviction notice to the people who are squatting on your potential." A wave of applause and laughter rippled through the crowd. "They can try to take your money. They can try to take your youth. They can try to rewrite your history and gaslight your reality. But they cannot take your mind. And they cannot take your spirit unless you hand over the keys." The Phoenix Initiative was born from the ashes of a burned-down life. We are here to ensure that when a woman's financial house is set on fire by the very person supposed to protect it, she does not burn with it. She walks out of the flames, she audits the ashes, and she builds a castle. The applause grew louder, women nodding fervently, some wiping away tears of recognition. To the women in this room who are currently in the dark, wondering how they will pay their bills, wondering how they will face their families, wondering if they are too old to start again, hear me clearly. I leaned into the microphone, my voice dropping to an intimate, powerful whisper. You are never too old to demand respect. You are never too old to protect what is yours. And you are never, ever too old to become the love of your own life. I raised my glass of champagne. To truth, to justice, and to the beautiful unwritten chapters that await us all. The ballroom erupted. 300 people jumped to their feet, the applause deafening, echoing off the crystal chandeliers. I stood on the stage, bathing in the light, feeling the profound, unbreakable strength of a life rebuilt on a foundation of absolute truth. The story of Serena Price didn't end with a broken heart. It began with an awakened mind, and as the jazz band struck up a triumphant, upbeat tune, I knew with every fiber of my being that the best years of my life hadn't been stolen. They were just beginning.